Hi everyone. It's great to see you all, and I'm glad you're joining me in this class. Just a few things before we start talking about this week's lesson and topic on field methods. I recommend that you look at your assignments, even if you don't start them yet, at the beginning of the week. That way you have time to think about questions and contact me by email, by message, by phone, or in office hours if you have any questions. Because if you leave it till Saturday or Sunday, I'm not always available on the weekend, and I might not see your questions. You've been doing a really great job so far, but just a reminder as we go along, the assignments might get a little more complicated or into something that you might have a question on. So it's always a good idea to start off the week looking at all the materials, looking at the discussion questions, the assignment, and just thinking, oh, what questions do I have to ask Dr. C? Just to make sure that I can respond to you. Okay, another thing is the discussion question responses. First of all, I'm so glad that many of you really enjoyed particularly the TED Talk by Dr. Deb Roy, which is fascinating research. And in fact, some of you even mentioned how it would be fabulous if someone had done the same study with a bilingual family, and how would that have turned out? And so now you're thinking like linguists, and I'm very excited about that. So I look forward to one of you doing that future study. So when you're doing the discussion question responses, I would recommend that you first save them into a Word document as you're writing them, and try to avoid using your phone, since sometimes students have more difficulty typing in the responses on their phone. So sit down at your computer or in a computer lab and type out your responses in a Word document, or I'm not sure what the Mac version is, maybe it's still Word, and that way you can save it and have it. So even if all of a sudden Blackboard goes down, the internet goes out, you still have that. And you can send me that document. You can say, Dr. C, Blackboard's not working right now. And there's different ways to get that to me. Okay, and that would be wonderful. Okay, another point that I wanted to make is that a few of you in the discussion board, and this is okay, this is what it's for, mentioned imitation. For example, oh, the baby was saying gaga and not water, so that proves that babies don't learn just by imitation. Well, that would still be an example of imitation. The baby is trying to imitate those sounds, saying gaga. It's an imperfect imitation, but that's still an imitation. So what the linguists are trying to get at when they say that babies don't only learn through imitation is that children will say things that follow the rules of the grammar, but adults never say them to them. Okay, an example is my daughter. She frequently will say things like I eated, or I runned, or I wind. She says that one all the time, right? Very competitive spirit. I doed, okay, for instead of did. So that is called the overgeneralization of a rule. So she's learned that most times in English, you add the ed to a word and it makes it the past tense. But she's never heard me say that to her. I don't say, I ate dinner last night. No, she's just using the grammar in her brain. So that's an example of how we know that children aren't only imitating our language. They are working based on these grammars that they have in their brain and that they're selecting. All right. Since a few of you mentioned that, I wanted to clear that up, and hopefully that does. If you have further questions, though, please contact me, see me during office hours, all those wonderful ways to get in touch, and we'll talk more about that. So this week, we get to talk about field methods, or research methods in sociolinguistics, or the social aspects of language study, which is wonderful, but at the same time, is like a drive-by, right? This is something that you would have a whole class on, or even multiple classes in your journey to become a linguist, which maybe some of you might be deciding that's something you're interested in. So just realize that there's a lot more in depth to each one of these types of field research methods. We're just kind of getting our toes wet, getting a little bit of an idea of what's out there, what different kinds of research exists, what different kinds of field methods are available, what kinds of studies, and how you would study different things. So one thing that I wanted to point out that they talk about is consent. Okay, informed consent is huge and very important. And in fact, I am disappointed that I forgot to mention that when I asked you to either record a child or use one from the internet. Well, if it's posted on the internet, it's fine. But hopefully you ask the parent of that child, is it okay if I use this research and I analyze it and I take an audio recording? Most of the time, this is kind of, everyone realizes that you should do this, especially with children. But every once in a while, people forget and think, they won't care, in this day and age where everyone walks around with their phones filming everyone. But it's a extremely important step in ethical research responsibilities. So I just wanted to point that out, that whenever you're doing research for this class or outside of this class, that you always want to make sure that you give the participant the option, first of all, and that you're also asking for their consent. And when you're doing a study that you would like to publish, you also want to make sure there's additional steps. There's an IRB protocol that you need to write up this whole proposal, go through training for ethical conduct of research, and you also need to have a document where the participant would sign. Now, for the purposes of class research that you're not planning to publish further down the line, it's just fine to get their consent, their verbal consent. Maybe you'd want to draft a little statement and get their signature if you're worried about it. That's fine too. If you end up having an idea for the research project for this class that you're like, I think I do want to continue with this. I think I really want to, publish this down the line, then talk to me. We can have a discussion. Sometimes it's good to do a little pilot study without all of the additional levels of trainings and IRB proposals, but talk to me definitely, and we can have a discussion on how we can facilitate this research for you moving forward. So another thing they point out is that Chaika mentions, that in some studies you might not have audio recording or video recording. That is very, very rare nowadays in linguistics. This book was written a while ago. There are very few circumstances under which you would say, I'm not able to take video recording or audio recording, just because if no one else can hear what you heard, there's no reliability. You can't have someone else to double check your judgments and say, yeah, that really is this certain format, or that really is what's going on in that situation. The vowels are really changing. You can't even check yourself, because at one point they mentioned this. If you really are hoping or expecting to hear a certain thing, your brain might hear that. So it's really important to have that double check with other researchers in the field, in whatever field you are. And in linguistics, it's usually through audio or video recordings. Now, in terms of research, we have two main types of research. You could set up an experiment, okay, so like the match guides is an example of that, or the natural observations. Another example of the experiment that I wanted to touch on was the one that was mentioned in the chapter about LeBeouf. Okay, so LeBeouf goes into these different department stores, an upper class one, a middle class one, and a more basic one, and lower class. So he is asking people in those department stores, along with also people who work in those department stores, where something is that is on the fourth floor. Okay, and he's doing this to try to figure out whether a certain use of the R in fourth is dependent on socioeconomic status. Now, he did find a correlation there. And so, for example, some people would say it's on the fourth floor. Other people would say it's on the fourth floor. Okay? So that's what, since you couldn't hear those sounds as you were reading the chapter, I wanted you to get that idea, right? So there's this varying degree of R-lessness, of not saying the R at the end of the word that he found. And the chapter also nicely lays out some of the problems with that as well, right? So were those people really from New York, from that area? Were they really from that socioeconomic status group? Were the people working there from that socioeconomic status? So there are problems with the way he conducted his experiment, but it's still a very important seminal study within the field of linguistics, sociolinguistics especially, since it shows us how got a whole range of linguists thinking about, wow, how do different features of language correlate with variables such as socioeconomic status. Okay. Then on the end of naturalistic observations of spontaneous speech, for example, you can have quantitative research or qualitative research. So an example of a quantitative research study would be, for example, the one that Dr. Brian Bessett had presented on Thursday at our linguistics seminar series. You're always welcome to that, by the way. So he did his on loan words from other languages, and so he counted up these features and used percentages to find out how many occurrences were generic, etc. Okay, so it's looking at certain features within a data set that is naturalistic. On the other side, qualitative would be more descriptive, and it would be looking at a deep sort of understanding of smaller amounts of the data, narratives, and finding similar features. So I have done both the quantitative and the qualitative, although strictly within the realm of naturalistic observations. So I have done studies on code switching in dual language schools with children. And with that, I've looked at both ways. I've done some descriptive quantitative work, so counting up the code switches. Now, since I had a small number of participants and it was an ethnographic study, meaning a close understanding of a small community or a smaller group, then I didn't have statistics, but I had descriptive quantitative. So that's the numbers, how many code switches happen when and where and what types, for example. And code switching, again, is when you switch between one language and the other, or others might be the case. So some of you might have heard it more as Spanglish. Okay, so the switching between Spanish and English. And then I've also looked at the same classrooms, the dual language classrooms, and studied how the language attitudes work with that community. So with the parents and with the teachers and with the students, what are their attitudes related to these different languages? What are their motivations for speaking these different languages, for example? And that would be on the qualitative side of things. There's nothing I can really count there, but you're working with these ideas and getting a sense for something that's going on in that community, along with other research that I've done. But those are just a few examples of how that would fit into the quantitative qualitative paradigm within the realm of natural observations. In both of those examples, I was a participant observer, meaning that I was involved in the classroom. With kindergartners and third graders, I don't really think you could be uninvolved. They very much approach you and talk to you, and so helping out and doing different things in the classroom with those little sweethearts. So then I also wanted to point out that we're hoping to develop a corpus of sociolinguistic interviews for here in the Rio Grande Valley. So if you're interested in getting involved with that at all, also please send me an email, call me, contact me, see me during office hours. It's something we're very excited about. So in a sociolinguistic interview, you'll talk with someone, could be anyone that you know from here in the Rio Grande Valley region, and you first it's semi-structured, so there's a few interview questions, but then after that there will be some just free-flowing conversation. You could be talking about football, about soccer, about the weather, or what you did on Saturday, anything. And so then we de-identify all the information about that specific person, any names of places, etc., so that, it's not traceable to that particular person. And then we can use that data to find out patterns about code switching, for instance, about different types of values, about different types of speech patterns within this region. So we're very excited. This would be like a treasure, and we're going to put this up on a very nice web page where it could be an archive of this speech from here in the Rio Grande Valley, which is so amazing and wonderful. So let's see. So that's a little bit about the research methods. I want to remind you, you have your quiz due on Wednesday, your discussion questions also due on Wednesday. The responses are due on Friday, and assignment 2 will be due on Sunday. Now for assignment 2, you're going to be creating a research proposal, a mini research proposal for the research that you'll be doing for this semester. Now you might say, Dr. C, I'm not sure I'm at that point yet. We haven't really looked at that much yet this semester. That's okay. You can change your research proposal moving forward. You can say, oh, that's not really what I want to do. What we're doing here is just kind of getting an idea, a sense for something that you might be interested in within the realm of linguistics, and also getting an idea for how do you do a research proposal. So the assignment sheet has the different steps laid out for you. One thing I want to point out is that it does ask you to find 3 different articles that are related from the library using the search, the summons search there, and let me know if you have any questions on that. And I also just wanted to remind you that on Thursday we have our linguistics seminar series happening again. This time it will be Dr. Hernandez from Spanish, and so that'll be happening from 12:15 to 1:15 p.m. And then also on Friday, we have club meeting, which is Cross Linguistics Undergraduate Board. And any of you who are at all interested are welcome to join. There's meeting on Brownsville and Edinburgh with ITV, and also we can set up Skype too if it's something you're interested in. So that's at noon on Friday. All right, everyone, good luck with this week, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.